Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, the White House fighting a rearguard action in the media battle over Iraq.
The military objectives of the surge are, in large measure, being met.
Egyptian state media take on the internet rumor mill.
In terms of an information battle between the state-controlled media and bloggers, I would think that bloggers got the upper hand here.
And some of our favorite YouTube and web characters gathered together for the first time. Welcome back. It was billed as the latest potential turning point in a war that's crying out for one, and it was televised live. The testimony this past week before Congress of America's military commander in Iraq, General David Patraeus, and the U.S. ambassador to Baghdad, Ryan Crocker, turned into a showdown between pro and anti-war forces in the U.S., one that was played out through the media. At issue, how long the Bush administration's escalation of the war will continue. That's our starting point this week. The stage managing, the spin, the counterspin, and the way the story played in media, both mainstream and alternative, in the continuing battle for the hearts and minds of the global media over Iraq. It was the story global news channels focused on this past week.
In Iraq.
The American commander in Iraq and the U.S. ambassador to Baghdad making the case for continuing the war.
Remember one thing that General Patraeus said, this war is being fought in Iraq, but it's being fought everywhere, even in the media.
The military objectives of the surge are, in large measure, being met.
I don't buy it.
I think he's dead flat wrong.
None of us should be fooled. Not the American people, not you in the media, not us in Congress.
But the general's conclusions and those of the ambassador were made almost anticlimactic by the leaking of their positions before the hearings, as the White House tried to preempt the media debate. And skeptical elements within the U.S. news media actively countered the White House spin by publishing poll findings damaging to the administration's argument.
In a new ABC News Washington Post poll, 53% of Americans think Patraeus will try to make things look better than they really are. Only 39% believe his report will honestly reflect the situation.
Iraqis share that skepticism. 65 to 70% of Iraqis say the surge has actually made things worse. In Baghdad and even in Anbar, a stunning review. Responses about the surge were 100% negative.
The White House can usually count on the support of at least one U.S. news channel.
Much progress has been made.
Fox, which graphically bought into the progress report and subtitled its entire coverage that way. Much of the media were smelling a rat well before the general testified, when Congress learned that what had been touted as the Patraeus report would not, in fact, be written by the general.
Why are we surprised that it turns out today that the report on the surge by the latest White Knight of Iraq, General David Patraeus, will not be written by General David Patraeus, but will be written by the White House, despite the constant references to that report as his?
General Patraeus and Ambassador Crocker will be coming back to report on the findings of the success of the surge. How the troops are configured, what the deployment looks like, will depend upon the recommendations of David Patraeus. General Patraeus and Ambassador Crocker will return to Washington to provide a more comprehensive assessment.
To say nothing of the assessments of dozens of nameless staffers and those with nothing but political viewpoints from the White House.
Mindful of that criticism in the media, the general went right at it in his opening statement.
I wrote this testimony myself. It has not been cleared by nor shared with anyone in the Pentagon, the White House, or the Congress until it was just handed out.
Among the most skeptical media voices on the picture the general was painting were speaking Arabic. From the London-based pan-Arab newspaper, Al-Quds Al-Arabi, Patraeus' report is a clear example of a manipulation of the truth, the embellishment of small successes, the reduction of attacks in Anbar, as if this is an achievement worthy of gloating. 200 operations a month is still a massive number against the strongest army in the world. Al-Arab, another pan-Arab publication, said, both Patraeus and Crocker know that a withdrawal of 4,000 troops means nothing to the U.S. military or the fighters that confront them. This proposed strategy will distance us from the real issue of a complete withdrawal, at least until the U.S. presidential elections next year. Then there were those arguing that General Patraeus should not be seen as a nonpartisan voice in the Iraq debate, let alone a credible one. This was Exhibit A in their case against the general, an opinion column Patraeus wrote in 2004. Not only were his optimistic projections for Iraq proven very wrong, but the general's critics suggest the column was timed to help President Bush win re-election. It was published in the influential Washington Post just 6 weeks before Americans voted.
If that guy said 3 years ago how much success we were having in Iraq, and he was dead wrong, when he comes back 3 years later and he says we're having success in Iraq again, why would we believe him? Why would we trust him? If the Democrats and the media don't see past this fraud, they're doing this country a great disservice.
MoveOn.org, a progressive anti-war group, went further than that, taking out a full-page ad in the New York Times attacking the general's integrity. Then there was the online video onslaught from the U.S. anti-war movement.
We're making progress. We're making steady progress. We're making progress.
Patraeus didn't even write it. Bush wrote it, and he wrote it in crayon.
A true war. The United States and our allies have prevailed.
The Surge, in theaters of operations since February, and it's just getting started.
It's gory and messy. Doesn't really go anywhere.
They mounted attacks on mainstream news outlets like CBS for going to Iraq but giving the general an easy ride.
What were the biggest mistakes made?
Well, if you go to my 5 pages of Senate testimony, you can find those, but we're focusing to the future now.
Come on, just give me a quick thumbnail sketch. All right, I'll look it up.
As you have a situation where you are spiraling upward instead of spiraling downward.
And he told me he thought the trend was
Spiraling upward instead of spiraling downward.
And there is a new generation of political messages on the web in this battle. Slickly produced and measured in tone, they were put out there long before Patraeus got to Washington.
I think it's a political document, and I don't think you can see it in any other way.
What it's going to say is if we keep troops in a given area, a lot of troops in a small area, we can achieve security in that area. Well, duh, of course we can. That's not the issue. The issue is why the hell are we there in the first place?
Iraq, Monday, September 10th. 77 Iraqis killed, 132 Iraqis wounded, 13 U.S. soldiers dead, all on the day the general went to Capitol Hill to deliver his progress report to America. Our Global Village Voices now on the Iraq story and the way it's being reported.
On the whole, the Iraqi press has been underwhelmed by the Patraeus report, in large part because they have little interest in it. They feel what goes on with American politics is removed from the situation on the ground. The only divergence on the whole has been between those who blame the Iraqi government, the Shia politicians on the whole, and those who seek to blame the Sunni politicians, the opposition. In addition, some of the Sunni papers once more seek to point to Iran as a prime culprit, whereas the Shia papers seek to blame Saudi Arabia, the UAE, the usual suspects. But with regarding US politics, they themselves are removed.
If you've got an opinion on the media, just let us know. Email us at listeningpost@aljazeera.net, and we'll explain how to have your say, how to be one of our Global Village Voices. Time now for Listening Post News Bites. In Gaza, the Hamas police force turned on journalists covering a recent Fatah protest rally. They beat up reporters, confiscated their equipment, and made several arrests. When Hamas seized power in Gaza in June, it promised freedom of reporting, but the police force has intimidated the media, particularly over their coverage of pro-Fatah events. This follows reports from the West Bank that Fatah has closed Hamas-affiliated media outlets and prevented Hamas-supported newspapers from circulating. In Iraq, the death toll for journalists and media workers since the U.S.-led invasion of 2003 has hit the 200 mark. One of the most recent victims was Anwar Abbas Lafta, an Iraqi translator and interpreter employed by the U.S. television network CBS News. He was abducted from his home in Baghdad and his body discovered 5 days later in nearby Sadr City. According to Reporters Without Borders, Iraq is not just the most deadly war for the news media. 73% of the journalists killed were directly targeted unlike other wars where reporters are primarily victims of collateral damage. There's an unlikely hit on Iranian television these days, a dramatic love story between an Iranian-Palestinian Muslim man and a French-Jewish woman set against the backdrop of World War II. 0 Degree Turn is the most expensive show ever aired on the Islamic Republic's state-owned TV channel and is filmed on location in Paris and Budapest. The content of the state-funded drama seems at odds with Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad's repeated claims that the Holocaust is a myth. But many believe that the drama is a way for the government in Tehran to improve its image and make clear that while it's still hostile towards the state of Israel, it does not condone anti-Semitism. HBO, the American network, has paid a six-figure sum for the TV rights to a film shot entirely inside Second Life, the popular virtual social networking site. It's called My Second Life, the video diaries of Molotov Alva, and it's the brainchild of filmmaker Douglas Gayton. The story is told through a series of 7 short video messages sent from a man who abandons his real life in favor of Second Life. The acquisition of My Second Life by a major U.S. broadcaster highlights the growing interest that mainstream media have in online content. And here's a new term for you. Are you a bandwidth hog? Have you been making a pig of yourself downloading internet videos? A U.S. internet service provider, Comcast, is cutting the connection of some of its heaviest users. The company claims that bandwidth hogs, by streaming movies in high definition as well as interactive games, are slowing down the network for everybody else, so they're dumping them as customers. Rival service providers like AT&T and Verizon haven't suspended anyone's services, so the hogs say they'll just take their business and voracious appetites for video elsewhere. Coming up after the break, Egyptian state media take on the internet rumor mill over false stories about the death of a president.